This is the first time coming back to speak in this time slot for 3 weeks since we had a 2-week retreat, and it's been interesting because a lot has happened in the last 3 weeks in the world, and people have been sharing their concerns about what's happening in the United States, and therefore affecting people around the world. And I talked about this a little bit before we went into retreat, because people were concerned, and that was in late January, and I think it's a good idea to say a bit more about how to relate to these changes that are occurring, because there's always, with everything in life, an opportunity to apply the Dhamma and to benefit from our ability to reflect upon the Dhamma and to apply it, to live it in our lives. So I was not entirely shielded from news during the retreat time. There's a little bit of touching in. And so I wasn't completely shocked, but I imagine what it would have been like if I really had no contact at all for 3 weeks, and coming out of it to the circumstance we have now would have been such a shock, I feel, because in that time there's been huge changes on the international stage, if you will, in that scope, because of the United States breaking ties with its allies and aligning with harsh dictatorships, and really causing a tremendous amount of suffering and worry among people, firing a lot of people from their jobs, and cutting back a lot of funding for aid and help for people who are in need around the world and in this country. And just a complete upending of the values that the United States has been holding clearly my whole life and before. And it's a real challenge. It's a difficult thing to watch, and if we let the mind run into the future, it can be quite anxiety producing, and difficult. So in reflecting on it all, it's really helpful to remember impermanence. It's helpful to remember, not just on the sort of superficial level of, yeah, this too will pass, although that's true, but also to remember that this kind of thing comes in cycles and changes. Everything has its dark side, and in this world, in the samsara, and that whenever things go out of balance, there's dukkha. And the reality is that in our material, physical world, in the conventional reality, nothing stays in balance. you get it balanced and then it weaves out of balance. Sometimes I think about riding a bicycle, you're never really quite fully balanced. It's kind of like to this side, to that side, right? So we need to really notice where our refuge is. Like, what is it that doesn't wobble? And it's interesting that the word dukkha is really the actual word dukkha comes from a wheel being out of balance and wobbling. So whenever things are not in balance, there's dukkha. And how do we bring our own mind and our own body and our own environment into balance, especially when there's something pulling it so far in an off direction? Well, of course, what everybody here is doing, you turn your mind to the Dhamma. The more we reflect on the Dhamma, the more we live according to the Dhamma, and the more we associate with others who are doing the same thing, the more support we have in seeing the Dhamma doesn't change. It really is a solid refuge. And many of you know that have been really enjoying, and is appropriate word, and inspired by Longpa Sameto's talks these days. And there's another one I want to recommend that I was listening to yesterday and this morning. And the title of it is, I think, reflection versus teaching, something like that. I'll post the link on the community WhatsApp later. But the whole idea that when we stop and we establish mindfulness, when we recognize that there's dukkha present, which how many times a day is that available for us? And we observe it, we really establish the mind as the witness, or I don't even know if that's quite the right way to say it, but we're aware of that. We're aware of what we're feeling, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. We're aware of that crummy mood we woke up with in the morning. As soon as we become aware of it, as soon as we reflect upon it, as we're taking that position of a witness, we can feel the shift. We're not caught up. We're not miserable. We're not overwhelmed. And when we really investigate what that awareness is, we start to see the solidity of it, the consistency of it. It's always there. Do we shift and come into that awareness? Or in the Thai tradition, they'll call it knowing, that knowing. And as we do that, there's an opportunity for insight to arise, realization. And Longpa Sameto is at this point where he's describing this so clearly from various perspectives, and the things that he's saying about how everything in the conventional reality, including time, including space, including everything we think, all the words we use, all the concepts, all the ideals, all the perceptions, it's all sankharas, which are impermanent, which are falling apart. They're conditioned, which means anything that's based on conditions is unstable. So we can, sort of pull the conditions together to feel stable, balanced for a little while, but then it falls out again. I mean, instead of looking for how to, and it's not like there's anything wrong with doing that. We want to try to balance things in our life, in our body, in our mind. But we can't take a refuge in that. What we need to take refuge in is that which doesn't change, that which is not impermanent. And we really have to see what that is for ourselves so we can listen to someone else tell us about it. The Buddha, Lungpa Samedo, Ajahn Ganha, Ajahn Suchart, Ajahn Anan, whoever it is who's had these experiences, and then we can, listen and get more hints. But then we have to find it ourselves. We have to experience directly what the Dhamma actually is. And we can. And I like the way Ajahn Sumedho's talking about it, because he's like, it's not some esoteric thing. It's not something that you have to wait decades to find. It's right here. Establish awareness where there's no self, there's no sense of self involved. And that's how you can tell if we're coming from the sense of self, we're afraid, we're at risk, we're worried, we are identifying with our pain, we're identifying with the sense of loss or gain or feeling superior or praise or whatever, whatever side it falls on, whether we like it or we don't like it. As long as we're coming from that perspective of self, we're not really in the Dhamma. And then we might layer blame on top of that, like, oh, I should be, and that's another sankhara, it's another fairly unhelpful, thing to layer on top of it. So as we're trying to cope with these incredibly, I want to say, obvious changes that are happening, being aware of how we feel and how what we're hearing affects us is vital. And then also, the Buddha also lived in the world, and he taught on a practical level how to operate in conventional reality. This is not about some kind of spiritual bypassing maneuver where all of a sudden we're just outside of everything. Because we live here, we have a body. We have to deal with the body's requirements. And so it's a spiritual bypassing, what I'm talking about? It's this idea that you kind of go to the high road, like, well, it's all falling apart anyway, But spiritual bypassing is also from the sense of self, where you're trying to just skirt or leap over the difficulty, the dukkha, and not really look at it. And so that's not the way out. That's not a refuge. And instead, seeing the way things are and being present with, being willing to look, being willing to see how our own conditioning is operating without identifying with it, willing to see how the world works without taking it as rock solid reality, because there's nothing rock solid in it. And then, if we, to the degree, like for most of us, it's probably an on again, off again thing, we get caught up and then we remember, become aware, go still, and feel the peace and the relief and the happiness in that. And then there's, things we can do. And Longpa Sumedho saying that when a person is really fully clear, the actions that one takes are spontaneous. Seeing an opportunity to do something to help and taking that opportunity, not from the sense of self, but from the sense of kindness, from the place of upholding the Dhamma. Some of the things that the Buddha said are, a noble disciple keeps the 5 precepts and speaks in favor of keeping the 5 precepts, or speaks against lying, killing, sexual misconduct, stealing. We're seeing a lot of lying and stealing and misconduct of all kinds right now at the top of this country. And I don't care what our ideals are, or our political positions. These are all sankharas too. But if we want to follow the Dhamma, and if we see the relief from suffering coming from that, then we would do what the noble disciple does, and we would live according to the precepts, and we would speak in favor of living according to the precepts and against the opposite. And so one of the things that's helpful in this particular situation is to really notice when people are upholding the wholesome. So someone was telling us, someone who works for the county here, in the police department, was telling us that their boss made a statement that said, we're going to follow the law and uphold the law. And, basically, we're not following the US government right now. And then another layer above that in the county made a similar statement. And his background is that he's an attorney, and he's the head of this many people in the county. And he said there are a lot of things happening in Washington that are against the law, and we are going to uphold the law. And a third of our funding for Medicaid comes from the federal government. So we're going to have to deal with things that happen, but we're going to fight it in the courts whenever possible, and we're going to uphold the law. Now, when people take a stand like that, then that's someone we should support. And there's a lot of that happening, but we don't hear most of that on the news. If we're listening to the news, we have to be careful, because one thing is that it can suck us in and be entertaining in a kind of perverse way. We have to watch the mind. And we also have to remember that even those places that feel pretty reliable in terms of their ethics about reporting, it's still always going to have a lopsidedness to it, or they can't tell, they can't give us the full story ever. So we have to really monitor ourselves and notice what it does to us when we hear what we hear. and look for the examples that we can connect with in our daily life here on the ground. And one of the things that you might have noticed in your life is that when there's some kind of disaster happening somewhere in the world, maybe you have a loved one or a friend in that part of the world and you're worried about them. And when you talk to them, they're like very far away from this experience, but we just see it kind of from that distance. We can't tell what the nuances are. I don't know if that made sense. It did to you. Well, so the point being, there's an opportunity here to brace ourselves spiritually, practice like our hair's on fire, use this as motivation. And know that as human beings, we've been through hard times before. And if they're coming, the best thing to do is to take care of each other. Somebody sent me, now I'm going to read a Facebook post, get ready. But there are some good things out there. This was written by someone named Warren Brantz. I don't know if it was on Facebook, so I imagine a lot of people have seen it, but it said, in a time of hate, love is an act of resistance. In a time of fear, faith is an act of resistance. In a time of misinformation, education is an act of resistance. In a time of poor leadership, community is an act of resistance. In a time like this, joy is an act of resistance. Resist, resist, resist. And I'm thinking, this is so true also in what the Buddha taught. Go against the stream. What's the stream of samsara? It's a lot of dukkha, a lot of foolish behavior, a lot of bad choices. And then it's up to us to, well, there's good and there's bad. It's up to us to go beyond that. And I love this quote that Ajahn Pasanno shared with us. Ajahn Chah used to say, the Dhamma is above bad and beyond good. And we can reflect on that. What goes beyond good and bad? What goes beyond our judgments? And how do we live from that? And continue to encourage ourselves and those around us to really rely on the Dhamma and to resist the unwholesome and encourage the wholesome. What did I say their name was? Lauren, Loryn, Brantz, Brantz.
Put that Facebook quote. That was the person who wrote the Facebook quote.
Yeah. Okay. And the Buddha was like, just this is part of being a noble disciple, to find the joy in the practice and the joy in our spiritual friendship and the security in the Dhamma and the energy and the courage to go against the stream.
Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, we were talking to Tom Alex, who some of you at least probably remember from the KBV community, who used to be Alex and Jacob Alex. And now he's living at Ajahn Suchart's as a monk. And we were talking to him the other day, kind of about this sort of thing. And I really liked his advice for people who are super worried about this, is like to kind of take it day by day and not catastrophize. So it's more like being present in the moment kind of stuff, just as a stabilizing function while,
They want you to talk louder.
oh, just as a stabilizing function while, if you've consumed too much news or heard too much from friends and are kind of spinning in it, of like not catastrophizing and just kind of taking this day by day or moment by moment and seeing what you can do on the practical level. Like if there's some kind of, active resistance you can be performing, and also taking it to there's the conventional level and then the ultimate level. So, balancing both of them on a day by day basis. And I thought that was really good, kind of as clear as you can get kind of advice. So I appreciated his reflection. And yeah, stop watching stuff too much.
Each of those items in that quote, I thought, okay, if there's misinformation around us, how can we help educate? With the appropriate invitation. And so on, and how do we protect the people in our life who are, going to be struggling with this, etc. So I'd love to hear anything anyone else would like to contribute around this topic or the practice in general. Yes, Anne.
That is so succinct and beautiful. And I love it's all beautiful. I love the concept of following the wholesome and applauding the wholesome. And I just want to share one thing on those lines. So in a Berkeley elementary school yesterday, I think it was yesterday, they had the 5th grade class each take on and represent themselves as somebody who'd made a great contribution or was making a great contribution. And my 9-year-old grandson, whose father is Israeli, spoke about a hero from the Yemen, and he said, "I am whoever," and told the story. And it was about anti-Semitism. So this little guy's standing up there and speaking about how the Yemeni, who had to leave his country because he was gay and because his mother was a woman, female activist, when he came to, I think it was Holland, his roommate ended up being an Israeli. So we had the Muslim and the Israeli, and he was horrified at the first thought of having a roommate. I guess he was a young man. Anyway, he learned that he learned to become a spokesman for anti-Semitism because of his relationship with this young man. But it was just sweet to know that my grandson in Berkeley was part of standing up for the truth and for those who've done good in the world, as were his classmates, speaking about Cesar Chavez or whoever the other people were. So I think when we see those kinds of efforts, we can feel, a rise in the spirit. And I think that's something that it's like bringing in joy. It's like looking for the wholesome. I love that phrase. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Ann. Yeah, we have to remember that there are a lot of people in this country and in the world who really stand by the desire, the wish, the ideals of equality and um, kindness and caring for people, honesty, um, and and then remember that beyond that, all of that is also sankharas. So it's like we do what we can, we stick with what's right, and we go beyond it.
So the going beyond is to release the attachment to the satisfaction of those things happening. I
Yeah,
mean,
we have to recognize that it happens and then it goes away again. You know, this is just the nature of this world, and there's nothing stable in it. And while we stand for the wholesome and we follow the wholesome and we save ourselves a lot of dukkha by doing that, our karma is cleaner. We go beyond karma because we realize the true nature of samsara and we're done with it. And we can't do it as a vibhava tanha move of trying to get rid of. We can't do it from that place because that's still the sense of self. It's the realization. And when that happens, there is this boundless love and compassion and joy and equanimity. And then our actions in the world are from that place of purity and selflessness. So that's the path you're on. And it's our job every day to walk it.
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Neil?
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that talk. It was very good to hear. And, you know, since the inauguration here in Mendocino County in California, we've had so far two, I guess you could call them resistance rallies here in the county seat. And I was kind of reluctant to go because I sort of expected like a lot of vitriol and harsh words and but at the same time I felt like I needed to be part of some sort of community resistance basically. And much to my surprise, my pleasant surprise, nearly every speaker who spoke at each of the rallies talked about compassion for the other side, or however you want to call it, talked about having empathy, talked about, not firing back, but um, showing who we are by how we behave, how we act, um, and love. Love just kept coming up. And, I mean, it's funny to say because I've only lived in this community for a little over 10 years, but I was very proud of my community at both events. And granted, it is a community that has a large number of aging hippies and their children. But even so, uh, it was encouraging to me, that uh, the Dhamma is everywhere, whether you're a Buddhist or not.
Yeah.
The Dhamma is out there. And I just wanted to share that.
Yeah. Thank you, Neil. Molly?
Neil, I'm kind of on the same track as you, I think. I have several, as I look at my life right now, I have several like prongs or avenues that I'm really focusing on. One is the Dhamma, and continuing to endeavor to structure my life so I have time to slow down and time to sit well and read suttas, and that's really central. So I sleep well and I wake up softly, and that. And then I also have all these things I do out in the community. So down here, I'm just going to mention a few of them because they're just all of them. I look at them and they're just really beautiful. So and I'm reading the Arizona Daily Star every day, briefly, and my practice is to not get wrapped up in it. Do you want to be informed in the unfolding? And I want to consciously say, don't let it get under your skin. Don't put my head don't put my head in the sand. Don't gloss it over. Don't be spiritually bypassing all the hard stuff. Just be informed of the story. I feel I need to do that. So we went into town yesterday and we took in a whole drivetrain from one of my mountain bikes that I'd upgraded to a place called Bicus, which is a community in a funky part of town that takes used parts from bikes, and that mine were not used. They were just not working on my bike anymore. So I took it into Bicus, and they rebuild bikes. They have a massive little funky warehouse full of all kinds of bike parts, and they rebuild bikes and give them to the community. And people come in from the community and learn how to build bikes. So I go into this funky building that's all full of like some people's welded art structures of bike parts. And I go into the counter, and the person at the counter has got a long black hair, flowers in their hair, some blousey shirt, a short skirt, and probably was male at one point, but who knows? And was just so happy to be receiving these parts. And I'm looking around the shop, and there are people of I don't know what identity or gender, but they're all having a really wonderful time being part of Bicus, and it just made me so happy. Then we went into Sonoran Desert Coalition for a volunteer appreciation lunch, and we ate Tucson tamales, and somebody had cooked tepary beans, which are a small bean that the Native Americans have grown since way before the white people came here. And it was a bunch mainly of old farts who do collect cards from cameras in the desert and work on desert fence busting, talking to each other about what they're doing to go out and make a small positive difference. And then a bunch of younger people who are employed at this 501c3 to bring together a coalition of people to do to look after the public lands. And then we went to a Baha'i gathering here at the park that had been put together for a Baha'i holiday, and met with some friends there. We didn't stay too long, but it was still a good thing to do. And then this afternoon, we're having Chuck over to watch Arizona women's basketball game on TV. He's recently been diagnosed with Parkinson's. He was a great support to me when Gene had his accident. And last time we had him over to watch a game, he said it was the best part of his day. So that's kind of the balance for me. And I talk to my brother about once a week, who's an elected official up in Olympia, and he's really got his head on his shoulders, and it's really good medicine for me to talk to Stephen. So that's kind of what I'm doing during these times, and being here with you all.
Yeah. Thank you, Holly. Yeah, you know, one of the things I've really delighted in over the last few years is watching friends who retire really make good use of their retirement time. I think you're in that club, Holly.
Yeah. I liked Holly's comment too about, you want to be informed enough, but having the like detachment of mindfulness, like there's that space in there that you're not sucked in and just kind of wallowing. So yeah, do Holly.
Yeah.
It's good.
And not going too far down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Just
Well,
enough
all
to
of my
know.
friends who I talk to, whether I'm out doing desert fence busting or watching all of us are aware that this is our medicine right now.
Yeah.
And yes, I did a deposition for a lawsuit against a piece of freeway they want to put through the desert, and I mean there is active activism as well, but a lot of it is we just get together with like-minded people and try and make a small difference in each other's lives and the world.
Mm-hmm.
And also knowing that a lot of the agencies we work at are going to be short-staffed. And so volunteers are where it's at. Because
Yeah.
we've been together for the next 3.5 years.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, I had to have one more thing.
Oh,
I saw 2 resist bumper stickers. So somebody mentioned resist. And one of them yesterday was on the door of the old Y in downtown where all the Audubon is and Snow and Desert Protection and a bunch of other 501c3 activists. And it said, it was on the door, and it said, all law enforcement officials do not enter without a lawful search warrant. And diagonally across it was the word resist. You can't see it. And then I was driving home, and on the bumper sticker of a car was the same font, the same gray, real subtle, says resist, which I think is really interesting. I don't know what resist means. Maybe it means going out and removing barbed wire in the desert and being friends and volunteering.
Yeah, well, in that case, it sounds to me like an organized effort in resisting search for immigrants.
Oh yeah,
And
Tucson is
Ice coming in.
big about that. That happened
Yeah.
last time this came down.
And I did hear someone who is completely in on rounding up immigrants and packing them off to somewhere, that the people in Chicago were really well informed and prepared to not allow illegal search. And what they're talking about there is illegal search.
Right.
So
Using coming in a doorway to find people when you don't have a justified legal reason to do so.
yeah, thank you, Holly.
The relative.
And I think that when we're not sure, the place to go is deep into the Dhamma. Because the more we can recognize the illusion of a self as illusion, as something that does not exist. We're not really the body. We're not really all this conditioning that we acquired over whatever lifetimes and whatever we were taught in this lifetime. We're none of that. So it's from really connecting into the Dhamma that the spontaneity comes, the like, oh yes, this is what I should do now. This is because we keep doing things, and we're not going to stop doing things. We're in this realm where doing is like, this is what happens, right? You're even when we are relaxing, we're doing relaxing, but if we do it from that selflessness, basically informed by the knowing. And it doesn't mean that everything's going to work out. This is samsara, but it's like going deeper into the Dhamma and then feeling it, I think, is what I'm trying to say from that place. And so even what we think, the positive things we think is helpful. Like the blessings we share and the dedication of our merit. And, it's not like we have to have some ability we don't have. We can, if we're conscious, we can take positive action. And maybe sometimes we have ideals that say it's not enough, or I'm not really finding the right thing. Maybe that's more of an idealism that keeps us thinking whatever we're doing isn't enough. Even when we don't, the practice, if we're regardless, like people said, regardless of your religion or whatever, if we're able to touch into that depth inside, sometimes even more so in a crisis situation than not. If we can come into that, if there's some element of understanding how things work beyond the material, beyond the discrimination, beyond the oppression, beyond, if we can touch into the heart in that way, there's action that can be taken regardless of what the situation is.
So I think kind of what you're saying is like the tension is coming from that sense of self. The dukkha is coming from the sense of self. And the more you drop the sense of self, the more you can act out of real compassion, real karuna, and wisdom, and have it be effective. So the constant working on dropping the sense of self is really important. And then the practical stuff is too, but it's going to actually have a better effect if there's the less self you have, the more beneficial it's going to be overall.
Mhm.
Right?
Whenever there's that tension, there's dukkha. Whenever there's dukkha, there's the sense of self.
Helpful.
Yeah. Memo?
Yeah, thank you, Ayya, and thank you for this great talk, and everyone who's been sharing has been really helpful. And I echo a lot of what says in the sense that there's always a tension, and I don't know where I'm going with this, but on the conventional level, what I found is that one of the most helpful tools that I found is discernment, to discern how much and what type of information you take in, and to have a critical view over whatever you take in. And that's very helpful. And also what Ayya Chitananda mentioned, that Tan Alex said about not overreacting over whatever somebody says. I mean, even here in Mexico, the president, she holds a daily conference, press conference, and of course they're always asking her, President, the president of the United States said this and that, and she tries to answer all the time like, well, one thing is what he says, but the important thing is the thing that he signed. And he hasn't signed a bill that says that, so we're not going to react until he signs something. And I mean, she might be under a lot of pressure, but I think that's a very healthy attitude, and that we can. At least I'm trying to stay as calm as possible in every situation, and have like this critical view and discernment around what I'm taking in, and not taking in too much. And another thing that's been working, I mean, it's when trying not to speak about topics that I'm not really I don't have enough information to speak about, because that's when the worst situations come out in a discussion, because then you end up just fighting with other people. And the last time I had like this uh, uh, discussion with someone with a different view, a political view, I tried to be as calm as possible, and as mindful of my inner reaction, my inner world as possible. I knew I had enough information to speak about that topic, and uh, even though our views were totally opposed, we ended up like having I mean, I tried all the time to 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 see things from his point of view, and at the same time trying to tell him, well, I see it this way, and I see that you are what you're saying, and I know where you're coming from, and all that stuff, and try to be gentle, and that's something that I mean, I once had like this big discussion with my father, and it was more like an ego-based discussion, and I felt really bad about after that because it was a nonsense discussion about some political issue. I don't even remember what happened, what about, and after that I sat and meditated, and this, I don't remember the exact phrase that came to my mind, but it was something like. When you're discussing something, it doesn't matter who wins. If you're not being kind, both sides lose. Something like that. And that I try to remember that, and that on the conventional level, and on the Dhamma side, when you were speaking, I remember. I think it's my favorite, or one of my favorite verses from the Dhammapada, the one on happiness, which says, "Let us live so very happily, loving among the hostile. Among the hostile people, let us live with love. Let us live so very happily, healthy among the ailing. Among ailing people, let us live healthily. Let us live so very happily, content among the greedy. Among greedy people, let us live content." And this is Bhante Sujata's translation, which I find is probably the one I like the most of that verse. Well, just a few ideas.
Yeah,
And
beautiful.
thank you, Ayya, for this talk.
Yeah, thank you, Mimel. That was lovely, beautiful. I also thought about that same quote, you know, when we're surrounded by what's unwholesome, how to be wholesome, how to, you know, when we're around, you know, like the verse says, when we're around people who are hostile, how to be compassionate, kind, not hostile in any way. I mean, the wisdom always has to be there too. So that idea of discernment, the discernment around what we take into the senses, sense restraint from the place of, like someone else said, not putting our head in the sand, but also not being, you know, overly not being caught up in what we're hearing in the news. And it all comes back to selflessness and seeing the truth of this reality, that absolutely everything in this world is impermanent and imperfect and falling apart and subject to change and changing back and forth, ups and downs, you know, constantly, completely unreliable. And, you know, noticing, being aware of it, being present with it, that's where the stability is. Being present, really resting in the Dhamma, and meditating in a way that we're really relaxed, not trying to get anywhere, not trying to become anything, not trying to get rid of anything. And to just be natural, relax. Our nature is to be calm, kind, wise, balanced. Yes, Joni?
Yes, I just wanted to mention something that comes into my mind quite frequently, and I find it very helpful, is the last that last paragraph in the Metta Sutta. to abide in the recollection, but and then the two initial phrases, especially, I reflect on a lot, is the by not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one. And it's something I aspire to a lot, and just try to really keep that in mind. I mean, for me, I find that helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. If we can recognize that our views and opinions are also sankharas, anything made up of language is, it's unreliable. All of our memories are unreliable. Of course, we have to have the discernment around what's helpful, what's to be let go of or seen for what it is. Those things that come out of the sense of self, defend the sense of self, prop up the sense of self, and those things that really help us to let go, to relax.
And the phrase, the pure-hearted one, because I mean, for me, my motivations and intentions are rarely what I would consider pure-hearted. In other words, there's no mix in it. I mean, and when they are pure-hearted is when I have the greatest sense of release, and letting go and peace and calm.
Yeah. Then we want to be on the lookout for perfectionism too, in case we have that tendency, which is very strong in my conditioning, to then, kind of like, oh, I have to do better. I have to purify this more. I mean, it's the pure-hearted one doesn't become pure-hearted because they've perfected the personality. That is never going to happen. We're not going to perfect all our actions and all our words. What does it mean to be perfect? It's the full realization of the way things actually are. And so it's an interesting dance, isn't it? To, lean into the wholesome, incline towards nibbana, use that discernment, but without the critic, standing over us with the whatever, beat us down.
Yes, thank you. I'm also quite perfectionistic. So that's a good thing to keep in mind.
We can have a lot of compassion for ourselves. We're just trying to be good. It's nothing, it's not a bad thing. It's just that, like most methods, they can be taken too far. And yeah. So I really appreciate everyone's participation in this, and also the practice, the wish, the willingness, the inclining towards nibbana that you're all engaged in.